Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.
Tonight, we meet just as Hanukkah ends. I feel like we need some sort of Havdalah or some way to say goodbye. But instead, we have gathered here to welcome in Shabbat. And literally, it's easy to forget. I mean, last night, we lit the 8th candle, but Hanukkah didn't end until tonight, until the sunset now. So it was Hanukkah all day. But you know, maybe it's fitting that we don't have a Havdalah to say goodbye or separate Hanukkah off from the rest of the year. And of course, the reason we don't is because Hanukkah is not one of the holidays prescribed in the Torah, so it's not considered holy in the same way. It's not sanctified time set apart. It's very much part of the weekday realm. So, and that is exactly why we don't have Havdalah. And maybe it's fitting that Hanukkah is not separated off from the rest of the year. Hanukkah is so much about what it means to be in the world and having an impact in the world. Yes, we have those 8 lights that are purposely useless. That is, they are not meant to be used. They're only meant to proclaim the miracle, to witness to something. But the miracle that they are speaking to is all about being in the world. It's all about light in the world. It's about the power of spirit in the world. It's not about being separate from the world. And there's always that 9th candle, which is there to be used. It's actually there to be used. It's not useless. It's about working in the world. The 8 lights never appear without the 9th. The message is not separate from the world, but very much part of the world. Even the origin of the holiday is rooted in the world, in our story in the world. Hanukkah, like Purim, is termed a Jewish historical holiday. They are not prescribed by the Torah. Instead, they grew out of our experience in the midst of history, the experience of the Jewish people. And especially so with Hanukkah, because with Purim, some historians question whether the Purim story really happened as such, or if it somehow represents lots of things that might have happened, kind of a composite story of some sort. Because the particular king, Ahasuerus, and his officers and prime minister really cannot be identified and dated within what is otherwise known of the Persian Empire. It's not clear when, where, when, and if it happened, as written. But the Hanukkah story can be placed and dated by historians. It is rooted in history as we know it. So Hanukkah in particular is a holiday rooted in the world. And the Shamash is the most uncelebrated candle of the holiday. It kind of hides in plain sight. We always talk about lighting 8 lights, and then we light 9. That 9th candle, ironically, provides the light by which we can overlook it. When I was an associate chaplain at Lebanon Valley College, in a year when Hanukkah came after the end of the semester, I created a lighting the Shamash ceremony so we could do something to mark Hanukkah before everyone left. The focus was on the interaction of the contemplative and the active. So those 8 candles are the contemplative, just sitting there, and the 9th candle was the active one. But we need the contemplative. The contemplative gives us perspective that guides our action. The action brings the results of our contemplation into the physical world. So we need both. And this year I noted another shul, one in New York, interestingly called Lab Shul, an experimental, it's an experimental shul. which, by the way, in the self-image of the Reconstructionist movement, it's a whole movement of synagogues that are experimental, hothouse kind of experimental places where we try out different things and then share with each other what's been working and what's not. So, but this Lab Shul New York, they made note in one of their emails of the 9th candle, talking about this message too, carrying the light of Hanukkah into the rest of the year. So clearly I'm not the only one thinking about this. Each year, when we celebrate Hanukkah, we are also in the middle of reading the Joseph story in the Torah. In fact, almost always, at least in my memory, Parshat Miketz, the Torah portion called Miketz, is the Torah portion in the Shabbat in the middle of Hanukkah, but not this year. This year, Miketz is immediately following Hanukkah. It's tonight, tomorrow. But the Joseph story takes 4 weeks to read through. It is clearly the longest drama in the book of Genesis, and it is riveting. It is a riveting and nuanced and well-constructed story. Do yourself a favor. Get a readable translation of the Joseph story and read it. It is a brilliant piece of literature. Suspenseful, ironic, dramatic, humorous, and tragic. Consider, just as an example, from the end of last week's Parsha, where Joseph interprets the dreams of both the royal cupbearer and the royal baker. If you remember the story, they're all in prison, and the cupbearer and the baker ask him to interpret their dreams. To the cupbearer, Joseph says, 3 days from now, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your place, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hands as you used to do. And to the baker, he says, 3 days from now, Pharaoh will lift up your head from upon you and impale you on a pole. Not good news, certainly, for the baker. But you have to admire those literary parallels in this ancient literature. Both start off the same way. Pharaoh will lift up your head. In one case, to honor you. In the other case, well, so it goes. But when you find a story find a translation, get many translations mask that, I have to say. Some translations don't put in to the English what the Hebrew says, the fact that that parallel is right there. So here's a good one. Robert Alter's translation. Robert Alter, the 5 books of Moses, who labored and labored to try to portray, translate the Torah into readable English that reflects what's actually going on in the Hebrew. Joseph, in some ways, is a story of the Shamash made manifest. Joseph, like the Shamash, is separated from all his brothers and sisters. Yes, we know of at least one sister. There could have been more. Joseph ends up going out into the world, certainly uncelebrated, overlooked at the bottom of the social structure, a slave and then a prisoner, and he works in the world. It's quite an interesting experience reading the Joseph story among convicted prisoners, by the way. Reading the Joseph story in a prison. They find all sorts of things to latch onto there. But Joseph eventually shines bright. Actually, he shines as brightly as possible in any circumstance, which is part of what these inmates can find. He shines brightly wherever he is. But in any case, he is an example of a lone Jewish individual in the world. He's not with his community or his family. Eventually, he gets elevated into the highest places in the land. In Jewish history, this becomes something of a pattern. It comes to be known as the court Jew in medieval Jewish history. The court Jew, who often was a single royal physician or a royal administrator, who was the only Jew in the royal court, some high-placed Jewish official in the court who, as a result, ends up representing the entire Jewish community to the king or the sultan. And yet, who, as powerful as he is, always is a Jew. And Joseph does not forget who he is. Perhaps he's always trying to figure out how to take revenge. Some commentators think so. But in the end, he does not so much. He does put his brothers through some bit of a trial. You gotta read it. You gotta read it. It's just too much to summarize. But eventually, his better nature comes through. For most of us, there is a sense that our Jewish experience today is a lot like Joseph. Not that we are second in power in all the land to Pharaoh, but that we are Jewish in much of our life alone. In our workplaces, in our recreation places, in our community life, we often are one of just a handful at most of Jews in our circles. We may be the only Jew in our circle. It is not like most of the past 2,000 years of diaspora Jewish life, when Jews were scattered around the world in Jewish communities, but individuals lived most of their lives within those Jewish communities. For reasons of choice and reasons of coercion, most Jews, for the most of the past 2,000 years, lived with Jews, worked with Jews, played with Jews. That is not the experience today for lots of Jews. So in a sense, the experience of Joseph describes an aspect of our experience, being the lone Jew, or in another analogy, being the Shamish. In some sense, our being in the world is like the situation of the Shamish, whereas for much of the Jewish diaspora experience, for most Jews in the world, their experience was like being one of the candles in the menorah. So we do need to unlock the secrets of the Shamish. The Shamish bears light. The Shamish works in the world and helps others to work in the world. But most importantly, well, I'm going to say this also, the Shamish helps to bear the light of Hanukkah into the world. But most importantly, what makes the Shamish a Shamish is its relationship to the other 8 candles. A Shamish just wouldn't be a Shamish if the other candles weren't somewhere around. Similarly, Joseph never forgets his brothers and his father, his mother, his family, his origins. He always is Joseph, a Hebrew. And as tangled up as his relationship is with all of them, it still is they who form him. So the real secret to being Joseph is remembering who he is and where he came from. The real secret to being a Shamish is remembering the other 8 candles. The real secret to being a Jew throughout the rest of the year is remembering the light that shines forth during Hanukkah. The real secret to being a Jew in the world, especially a lone Jew in the world, is remembering who you are and where you came from and what Torah you are committed to. The entire world is going through a difficult period marked by a number of crises. The most acutely felt right now is the coronavirus pandemic. There is an upsurge in infection and disease. Health systems are being strained. People are facing homelessness and hunger. The number of funerals each week is lurching upwards. Hanukkah always comes at the darkest point on the calendar. At that moment when the days are shortest and the moon is small, so the nights are darkest. From here on in, we're going to begin to see more light, even when we are not lighting candles. Hopefully, too, we are turning a corner in the pandemic with the rolling out of vaccinations in the midst of Hanukkah. We still need to hold on, to be careful, stay in, stay masked, and insist that others do as well. Stay safe and do what we can to keep others safe. We still have to continue to support each other through whatever else will happen in the short term. But in the long term, at least for this crisis, it may be that we are beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel. May the light of Hanukkah continue to sustain us, sustain you and all of us as we travel together along the way. A Shamish, each of us. Shabbat Shalom.